Welcome back to the David Pakman Show. I am Farron Cousins from Ring of Fire and Farron Balanced, and I am sitting in for David Pakman today. Now, this week, obviously, the big news, Trump being kicked off the ballot in the state of Colorado after the state Supreme Court ruled that, yes, he did engage in an insurrection, and under the insurrection clause of the 14th Amendment, he is barred from being on the ballot in 2024 and technically beyond. Now, the fallout from that continues to happen. And one of the big things that folks need to understand, and it's a bit of a complicated thing, so I'm going to try to explain it as best I can, is that this decision from the Colorado State Supreme Court is absolutely going to have an impact on other criminal trials that Donald Trump is facing. Now, probably not going to have any impact at all in the New York hush money case or the documents case down in Florida. But the trial in Georgia and the federal trial for trying to overturn the election results, the one in front of Judge Tanya Chutkan, the decision of these judges is absolutely going to play a role in those trials. And here's why. First and foremost, Donald Trump has had his lawyers in both of those cases file motions for dismissal based on the fact that you're prosecuting Donald Trump for his speech. He is protected by the First Amendment. You cannot prosecute him just for saying things. My gosh, what kind of a country is this? They argued in front of the judges. In fact, they literally earlier this week filed a motion for dismissal in Georgia arguing that Trump was protected under the First Amendment, even though they're prosecuting him for, conspiracy to overturn the election results. They want to twist it and say, no, what you're really doing is prosecuting his speech. Well, even if that were the case, which it is not, however, this ruling from the judges in Colorado actually negates all of that in a very interesting way. Now, let me read you this. This is coming from Hugo Lowell from MSNBC. And he said, the D.C. District Court has also, rejected Trump's arguments that the speech makes him immune from prosecution because they found, the judge essentially found that it is not immunizing if the speech was in furtherance of a crime. And I think the fact this is piling up necessarily has to change his legal calculus going into the new year. So how is that related to anything? Well, it's related in this way. Part of the ruling from those judges in Colorado is effectively saying that Donald Trump, his speech, the things that he said, was in furtherance of a crime. That crime being the aiding or assisting or tacitly supporting an insurrection. And yes, that is a crime. So, because this court has now said that that kind of speech was in furtherance of a crime, Trump's arguments in these other cases that he's being prosecuted for his speech, the prosecutors can come back and be like, you know what? Yeah, you are. And we have legal precedent now telling us that your speech was in fact criminal. So if you want to go that route, you want to walk into this courtroom and make that argument, we've now got the legal precedent telling us that your speech was illegal. So, not exactly a winning argument. However, there's a caveat to that, and it's a very important caveat. Obviously, this is going to go in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. And depending on how the U.S. Supreme Court rules could determine whether or not this argument can be used to say that Trump's speech was in fact criminal. And I'm not just saying that it depends on if the court upholds the decision or rejects it, because even a rejection could still leave the door open for this argument to be used in court. And here's how that would happen. And this is where, people start to get a little, cloudy-eyed, because this is important. What the Supreme Court determines doesn't necessarily matter if they're saying, yes, he's banned or no, he's not banned. Accepting or rejecting the ruling is not what's at stake. It matters what parts of the ruling they reject. If the Supreme Court says that the 14th Amendment does not apply to Donald Trump, it only applies to Congress or any lesser office. So therefore, Colorado's ruling cannot stand. If the Supreme Court uses that argument, then the prosecutors in the criminal cases can still pull from the Colorado ruling and say that, listen, they determined his speech was criminal. Therefore, we can use that against him over here. But that's only if the Supreme Court doesn't issue a ruling negating the criminalization of the speech. And that, honestly, is probably the most likely scenario that we'll see coming from the Supreme Court. They're not necessarily going to overturn the rationale of the Colorado court. What they would do is simply say, this law does not actually apply to this guy. Therefore, he's okay to be on the ballot. If they don't touch the rationale of the ruling, then that can still be used in the other trials. If they say that the court's determination was faulty, that the language was wrong, that their decision was ultimately wrong, then it would pretty much prevent prosecutors from being able to use it. So those are the different scenarios, but I do think overall, as a whole, it's going to come back and bite Trump in these criminal trials.
One of our sponsors today is Manscaped. They make excellent products. You've got the Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra. This is Manscaped's 5th generation body trimmer and groin trimmer. You've got 2 next-gen blade heads, your standard trimmer blade for taking off a little bit of hair, the foil blade for taking off a bunch of hair. All of Manscaped's devices are waterproof and perfect for the shower. You'll also want to pick up Manscaped's Crop Soother Aftershave Lotion and Crop Preserver Anti-Chafe Deodorant. Whether you're shopping for yourself, maybe there's a guy in your life, Manscaped offers the perfect bundle with everything. The Performance Package 5.0 Ultra includes the Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra Groin Trimmer, the Weed Whacker 2.0 Ear and Nose Trimmer, Manscaped's liquid formulations, and 2 free gifts, Manscaped's Boxers 2.0 premium underwear with moisture wicking technology, and the Shed 2.0 toiletry bag. I have all of this stuff at home. Get 20% off and free shipping with the code PACMAN at manscaped.com. The link is down below.